Hi, I'm Lucas Bergstrom, CrowdFlower's product manager in charge of business data. And today we're going to talk about how crowdsourcing can help sales and marketing organizations. By the end of this webinar, you should have a solid understanding of what crowdsourcing is, how it compares to traditional data solutions, how it's used to drive sales, and what to look for in a crowdsourcing provider. So I have about half an hour of material to share with you, and then we'll open it up for some questions. So today we're going to focus on data quality and customer intelligence for teams that are selling out to small and medium-sized businesses. So these are kind of sales and marketing organizations that need to supply their sales force with a high volume of leads because they're selling out to smaller customers. So that means we want leads that are high volume, accurate, and actionable. That means that we have a healthy funnel. The information we're handing sales is correct, and we have enough information to effectively score and target our leads. So as you know, leads with incomplete or incorrect information can be worse than useless if your team wastes time trying to execute on them. So if you're handing over leads and 20% of the phone numbers are incorrect, that's a bad day. You're going to have an unhappy sales team. If you're responsible for providing SMB sales leads, that better data, not just more accurate data, but also having the right data to make leads actionable, translates directly into higher sales. So, basically the quality and comprehensiveness of your data on sales leads is tied directly to your ability to sell to them. But selling to SMBs brings a kind of particular set of challenges, right? There isn't really a great kind of all-in-one solution for SMB data. Traditional list sellers are selling information that is incomplete and often out of date. Part of this is a structural problem with the small and medium-sized business market. 10% of SMBs go out of business every quarter. And equally there are SMBs that are starting up all the time. So databases that are static, the kind that list sellers are typically selling access to, tend to go out of date pretty quickly. And a lot of those databases, some of the core information is really incomplete or just generally inaccurate. So most list providers have URLs for fewer than 40% of the companies in their database. So just the official website address, kind of the step one of collecting a good set of data on an SMB, that's missing more than half the time. And even core data like address and phone is often poor quality. Finally, international data is nearly impossible to get outside of a few countries. So, a lot of this is for legal reasons due to kind of data collection laws in the EU and other countries. But, a lot of it is just simply historical reasons that a lot of the list providers are US-based companies and their international capabilities are not as good. The end result is that it's hard to get high accuracy business data with good coverage. So, what are the different solutions that are available and what are the trade-offs? Traditionally, if you wanted to get more data on your leads, or if you wanted to verify existing data, you had a couple ways of doing it. And one was, buying lists from providers like Dun& Bradstreet. And as we've discussed, that's a great way to get a high volume of lead, um, but it's harder to get kind of high quality leads that way. Um, if quality is very important to you, you can staff up an in-house team to basically do the data cleansing for you. Um, this can give you very high quality. It's hard to scale up, especially if you need to adjust for seasonal demand, and obviously it's also higher cost. Um, and then increasingly there are automated solutions like Trillium and First Logic that will automatically match on the data in your CRM. Automated solutions can be very helpful for validating address formats and reconciling different data sources. But saying that an address is valid, saying that the format is correct, that the zip code matches the street address, isn't the same as saying it's correct. So only actually going and finding information on the business can tell you whether the address is actually correct. Um, because the address might be perfectly valid. It might be an address that actually exists, but it might be the wrong address for the business that you're looking at. And again, these approaches don't really help you if you need to actually go and get fresh data on international SMBs. So crowdsourcing is the first approach that gives very high quality data at very high volume. And that's why we think it's kind of such an exciting addition to this market, because it's the first way that people have of really getting high quality data for their entire database and enriching that data with customer intelligence that helps people close sales. And the reason it's possible is because it's a hybrid approach. So it uses real people to do research, unlike the list buys and automated solutions. But because it's sent out to the crowd, it can handle huge volumes, unlike the in-house solution. So let's talk a little bit about what crowdsourcing is. So crowdsourcing is used to refer to a lot of different things. Everything from Wikipedia to Kickstarter are examples of crowdsourcing. In every case, it's leveraging a large number of people over the internet to make a problem simpler, to break a large problem down into a lot of smaller tasks that individuals can solve. But when we talk about crowdsourcing for sales and marketing, we're talking about a specific kind of crowdsourcing called microtasking. And in microtasking, you've got huge crowds of people that are given very specific tasks with data to solve. So check this piece of data, go find this piece of data on the internet, categorize this piece of data. Those are all things that need a human being to achieve very high accuracy, but can be split up and sent out to hundreds, thousands, or millions of people. And all of these people will go and sign up at a site like Amazon's Mechanical Turk to be paid to do microtasks. So Mechanical Turk is the most well-known of these sites, but there are actually hundreds of these sites that exist today. Just to give you an idea of kind of how large the microtasking market is, CrowdFlower has worked with over 4 million unique workers worldwide. So, the microtasking is really lets you tap into kind of a fundamentally new source of human intelligence, and lets you apply it at very high scale to your data problems. Um, so, um, although it's very easy to get large amounts of data from the crowd, getting high quality data is difficult. So if you're going to work with a crowdsourcing provider, the most important capability you're looking for is quality control. And CrowdFlower thinks about quality control in two ways. So first, we think in terms of assembling the right crowd. So as I mentioned, we've had over 4 million workers contribute work via our system. Obviously, it's easy to get a very high volume of work that way, but the flip side is we also have to be very smart about who we let work on our jobs. So we need to use training, testing, and filtering to make sure that only workers with the right skills are working on any particular job. So we're always collecting data that lets us evaluate workers and make sure we've got the best workers for a particular job. And that's not just seeing which worker is the most highly skilled, but that's also catching people that are systematically trying to scam the system, or groups of workers that are trying to collude to get around our testing methods. So we've been around for about 6 years now, so we've got a pretty sophisticated system that lets us do that. But it's it's definitely a tough problem, and it's not easy for kind of new entrants to the market. So after assembling the right workforce to tackle a given problem, the next kind of step in quality control is the right workflow. So if you're collecting information on 500,000 businesses, say, you need to be smart about how you collect that information and how you verify it. So for a basic task like collecting address and phone information for a business, we might split it up into 4 or 5 separate mini tasks. What that lets us do is it lets us apply strong quality control at every one of those tasks before we assemble the result into the final product. So rather than just telling one worker, go out and find the address and phone number for this business, we might assign one set of workers the task of, finding the right data sources for that business. So, find the official website URL, find any Facebook pages managed by that business. Another set of workers will verify that those sources are correct. And then a third set of workers will, then harvest information from those pages. And by breaking it down in that way, it's much easier for us to apply quality control methods to make sure each step is being done correctly before we assemble the data back into a single unit. So if there's a secret to how we think about quality control, that's really it. It's really being able to break a high-level task down into the right set of subtasks and then applying quality control at every step down the line. And then, there are, everything I've talked about is sort of, generic quality control, but we do, depending on what kind of data we're collecting, we'll do very specific quality control measures for that. So for collecting business data, we might have certain criteria for what data sources we'll accept. Or we might, say, we're actually, for this job, we're only going to use a trusted set of workers that we know are, good at collecting data on businesses. So, quality control is really the thing that sets different providers of crowdsourcing apart. It's very easy to get access to an extremely large workforce. It's much harder to then turn that workforce into quality results. So the next question is, this sounds great, but realistically, what role is crowdsourcing going to play in my workflow? Because it is only going to be one tool in your toolbox. And as to how that works out in practice, I can give you some hints from my best customers. They will build a lead database from a variety of sources, inbound leads, list buys, and they know the problems with each data source. So at this point, they have a starting data set that they need to have deduped, cleaned, and enriched. So let's remove duplicates. Let's make sure that information is correct, and then let's collect additional data that will give us the customer intelligence we need to identify our best leads and then make a successful sale. So the goal is not just to take say a 75% accurate lead database and get it up to 95%. The goal is to actually make every lead accurate and actionable. So to have the customer intelligence to do effective lead scoring and targeting. So the first step is deduping. Automated deduping tools will take care of some of the duplicates, but will only get you so far. What some of our clients are increasingly moving towards is using the URL, the official website address for the business, as kind of a unique identifier for every business. And they found that's a pretty much bulletproof approach to deduping. URLs don't change. They're publicly available. They're much more common even than having a DUNS number. There are businesses that have never gotten a DUNS number, but they will still have a website address, and that's a way that a lot of our customers are increasingly using URL is just the first piece of data they want to make sure they have for every business. The next step is to make sure that the core data is valid. So address, phone, maybe additional attributes like hours of operation. This data isn't exciting, but having the right phone number for the business is the difference between a useful lead and a waste of time. And finally, the next step is really enriching each lead with the customer intelligence you need to make a successful sale, and identify which of those leads you want to target. So I can give you an example from one of our customers that sells high-end drafting software to engineers and designers. So they'll sell the software both to individuals as shrink-wrapped software, and to companies via an enterprise license. And every time an individual buys their software, they have the opportunity to register for customer support. So our client has a database with email addresses, street addresses, and in some cases a company name. But the information is extremely inconsistent. So in some cases you might have an individual not provide a company name, but they will provide their company email address. Or they might use a Gmail address but provide a company name. But often that company name won't be normalized. It'll be really hard to match it against the rest of your database. So it's difficult for them to take that and identify from the hundreds of thousands of people that have bought their software. It's difficult for them to go into that database and figure out where are the high quality leads, where are the individuals working at companies that might turn into enterprise licenses, because those are really valuable leads to hand over to the sales team. You've got a demonstrated interest that's strong enough that they are willing to buy the software, but this is so far it's an individual, but if the company is of the right type, that's potentially a very valuable enterprise lead. So this company uses the Crowd to clean up all of that data, to separate out the leads into individually, basically individuals and then companies, and then for companies to add category information that lets the sales team very quickly identify potentially interesting businesses. So they know that um, if if someone buys their drafting software at a bank, that's probably not an interesting enterprise sales lead because banks don't use a lot of drafting software. But if it was purchased at an architecture firm or an engineering firm, then it's suddenly a very interesting sales lead to them. So they will, you know, using the crowd to clean up that core data and then categorize each one of the businesses now lets them hand over sales a queryable database where sales can say things like, show me all of the leads in Texas at architecture firms that have never purchased our software before. Um, and this is something that they can do in real time, right? Connecting to the crowd via an API that we've set up, and make sure that their database is up to date at all times. So I think we've covered a lot of ground, but I hope that you've seen enough to understand kind of how people are using crowdsourcing, what makes it different than existing solutions, and kind of how it can be used to really change sales outcomes. Um, and I see a few questions from people so far. Um, and Chris wants to know what limitations crowdsourcing has and when it might not be the right tool. Um, it's a good question. I would say two things to think about. One is crowdsourcing really becomes valuable when you have very large databases of leads. So it's less valuable if you've only got, a database of a few hundred sales leads. But when you start talking about tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of leads, then it becomes something that makes a lot more sense. Um, the other thing I would say is that crowdsourcing is not really well suited to collecting personally identifiable information. So, it's if you want the phone number for a business, that's good. If you want the email address or phone number for a particular person at that business, that is kind of not as well suited to crowdsourcing. Um, okay, Wayne wants to know something about cost. Um, Pricing really depends on how much data you're collecting and what data you're collecting. Um, I'll say that we have in the past, collected, individual attributes for, less than 20 cents a business. Um, and on the higher side, we have, um, you know, needed to charge as much as, well, needed to charge more than a dollar for businesses where we're collecting a greater volume of information. Um, but this is really dependent on what kind of workflow we're building, um, and some of the custom workflows we build can have really different characteristics. Um, and finally, Jabanza, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, wants to know for the quality control techniques, um, how do you decide how many workers to assign to a given task? And that really depends. We will almost always get multiple workers to work on every unit of data, and then have a tie-breaking vote from a worker if necessary. Um, but definitely one of our key quality control techniques is getting those, basically getting agreement from multiple workers for every piece of data. That's part of what lets us achieve extremely high accuracy rates. Um, but basically how we use that depends on the kind of data we're collecting. So some pieces of information are very easy to verify, and we don't need to have too many workers work on a unit. But for others that are really high value or more difficult, we might get as many as 4, 6, or even 8 workers to work on an individual piece of data. Okay, so if no one has any other questions, I will send out my email address to everyone that participated in the webinar. And I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions that you've got. Otherwise, have a great day, and thanks for participating in this webinar with CrowdFlower.